Okay, so
Perfect.
let's move on to the last album. We've got
Tortoise.
and another band that I had not heard of. The album is Millions Now Living Will Never Die.
This one I had, unlike Cool as Shaker, who I hadn't listened to the album but I'd heard of. This I hadn't listened to the album or heard of them. So I know
Okay.
we're gonna be covering them later in the decade. I think the album we're gonna be covering is TNT. So this one was like a late addition to a bonus episode. So
Okay.
yeah, I went in completely cold on this one. And I didn't read anything about them going in because I wanted to give 2 full listens before I found out anything about what was coming in. So I found some interesting stuff. But Josh, what did you find?
Yeah, so Tortoise could be described as, I think I saw them as like post rock or something. That was one of the genres that they are
What does
described
post rock even? You know what I
I
mean?
don't
That's
know.
like the laziest term.
Yeah.
Post rock.
So they have, I would just, they're kind of hard to describe, but also not hard to describe. So they are electronic music, but they're also kind of jazzy and rhythmic and atmospheric is how I would kind of describe them. I guess there's rock elements. There is no vocals on this album. They are kind of they're exploratory, I would say, and they really kind of cross over between some of the like pure electronic music and
I'm reading something right now that says, as Tortoise rose to prominence, their often instrumental music has been noted for its ambiguous categorization.
Yes.
So good job, Josh, trying
Yeah.
to categorize it.
yeah, they're also, ambient. We've talked about that, genre and term a lot as far as some of the electronic music goes, and I would definitely place that in this album in this category. I mean, the first song, DJ'd or DJ'd, is 21 minutes long and really kind of explores the space, if you will. They don't have really traditional structures. There is no, verse, chorus, verse type of sound to them. They are also kind of spacey at times. They really have like a way out there feeling to them. And, there's only 6 tracks on this album, but it's only 42 minutes long. So like one of the tracks constitutes half of the album. And I found myself liking, I don't know, I guess I am kind of split on this album. Some of the songs I really like and respond to, and I think this really depends on like where you are at in your headspace and like what you're feeling. I wouldn't call this a night album like we would some other electronic bands. I think this works well during the daytime as well, but I think it really does kind of work for me as an ambient album first and foremost. I like the elements. The songs I liked most were actually DJ'd, the first track and the last track, Along the Banks of the Rivers, and they are different sounding. I think Along the Banks of the Rivers has a more jazzy feel to it. It's kind of moody and melancholic in a way that I really liked, and it feels more firmly kind of it in the space than some of the other ones where it goes out. I don't know. It just kind of like, they just kind of go in that jazzy way. They kind of like go out and explore the area, and you just kind of go along for the ride. I guess I am having a hard time describing what I like about this album. So why don't you jump in and tell me some of your thoughts, and I can help add some context.
Well, I agree with you, Josh, that like I process this both most and best as an ambient album. It's got a little bit of the same things that the Slint album we covered had, like
Okay.
that minimalist, that you have to really pay attention to the sounds, because there's the sounds you're hearing and then there's some sounds underneath it. So it's not a complex album, but it becomes more complex the more carefully you listen to it, I would say. Now, I like the Slint album, Spiderland, better than I like this one, but I did want to make a comparison there, because that's when I wrote down who I saw this, most as. I mean, this has all the things, and I'm not even just reading this off the thing, but I wrote down, I quickly became aware that this was going to be like a amalgamation of things, right? So ambient I wrote down, but certainly that krautrock ethos is here. The
Okay.
found music.
That's a good point.
There's electric music in this as well. Um, there's avant-garde elements as well, like when the like xylophone type sound just comes in. It's also, this album's hard to not process as like DJ'd or DJ'd and then the rest of the album, because
Right.
they're pretty much exactly the same length. Like track 1 and then tracks 2 through 6 are the same length. I liked Glass Museum track 2 and Along the Banks of Rivers the best. I will say that I think somewhere between 5 and 8 minutes is the best length for this type of music. Anything under, and sometimes I don't feel like I get enough of a piece of what they're going for. So that's where with like A Survey, the third track of Dear Grandma and Grandpa, I liked it, but I just felt like it was an exploration of sound, so it kind of becomes neutral for me, more so. Whereas like something that's 21 minutes like DJ, it's almost too much to process all at once. It very much reminds me of a jazz album where they start with like a really big piece of music and then a couple small pieces afterwards. We saw that a lot, right, in the 60s and 70s when we would do jazz albums.
Yeah.
And I was like in the middle on DJ'd because there's parts of it I liked and parts of it I didn't like. I actually liked the parts in it that were more experimental than I liked what I call the metronome part, like the part that stays consistent. Like I kept waiting for the stuff that broke the metronome more than I enjoyed returning to the metronome, which is like the opposite in some ways of like Krautwerk, where I liked both. I liked the exploration, but I also liked what was the underpinning, the digital highway or the computer world, like yeah, that like literally, right? They called the one the Autobahn, right? Because it
Right.
was like the through line running through, and those, I thought the both pieces together like worked pretty much perfectly. On this one, I definitely like the experimental pieces more. This is definitely a headphones album, and it's also an album that requires, I think this is going to sound oxymoronic, but even though it's an ambient album, I always feel like I have to listen to ambient albums more closely, which I know sounds kind of funny. It's
Yeah.
like, it's a little bit of like, it's light, but it's so dark at the same time. And it's like, I get it. But for me, if I had just processed this as ambient, it just sort of flows over me and doesn't like leave a mark. Like the thing that has to be done with this almost is that you have to do a close listen to see the stuff lurking around the outside. And if you're willing to do that, you start to find little hidden gems and discoveries in this. But if you're not willing to do that, it just kind of becomes background music for whatever task you're doing
Right.
at the same time. And so whenever I listen to an album, I'm like, oh, it's going to be one of these ambient albums. I know on the second listen, I'm basically going to drop what I'm doing and just listen carefully to see if there's more to it. I would say I found quite a bit to like, and I dug back in particular to Along the Banks of Rivers quite a bit, because that's where I found the most gold, so to speak.
Yep.
It's got sort of that, I would say like Twin Peaksy like sort of sound, that wow 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 wow, which is the through, and then just a variety of sounds that sometimes sound like a hearing test or like a dirge, and you're just trying to figure out how all the pieces come together. And I was intrigued by that, and I start to listen to these albums a little bit academically after a while, and I've said this multiple times, and I'll revisit this for those that might have heard me before. I view this type of music a little bit from an academic standpoint. I process it as music, but it is not, to me, music to be like enjoyed as much as it is to be understood, or like an exploration of sound, right? And that doesn't bother me. I know sometimes like it bothers other folks. I don't mind doing that, but I also like, I have to do it that way. I can't just listen to this and go, oh my gosh, this just puts me, this stuff doesn't necessarily put me in a mood as much as it encourages me to expand my palette sonically. And I appreciate that, because I like these from time. Like, I couldn't listen to this all the time, but I like this as almost like a reset in terms of my music knowledge. So
Yeah. To your first point, I think, I understand that that paradox of of ambient music and having to listen closely, because I don't think ambient, and I think you'll agree, is like ambient music does not mean it's shallow, right? There is a depth to ambient music where you can,
for sure,
like you said, to your academic point, like you can pay attention and get a lot out of it. I think the interesting thing about ambient music is it can kind of work both ways too. That's kind of the strength of an album that's has that label to it. And to your point about being academic on this album, I find this album, pretty listenable, like musically and sonically. It is kind of experimental, but not as experimental as some of the other songs. It's not like fully like computer music or like beeps and boops, if that makes sense.
Well, that's why it's hard to categorize, because if it was easy to categorize, we would have been like, oh, because we've listened to now most of the things, right? And so we would have been like, oh, it's like this thing, but it isn't. That's why I was like, I found a little bit of Slint in it, but that's not a very great comparison. It's its own thing.
Yeah, and sometimes I like when, as you said, we're almost at 1,000 albums. Sometimes when I think about these categories, I place them on a spectrum, and like, at one end you have, I don't know, KLF and some of the more out there avant-garde electronic music, and then you have
but there's a smoothness to them where they're listenable, and then you have like I think what you're going to say, the ones that they're almost not music, the ones where we're like, I don't even know if what I just listened to is music, like the Residents Eskimo is one, or the
Autechre,
yes,
more recently, and so those.
Then there's like Public Image Limited, which is like harsh, right? That's almost designed to like challenge you in your face a little bit with the versions of this,
right? Or then on the other end too is like is like the DJ Shadow album. I would put that in electronic music, and that I found that very listenable. So it really, they can run the spectrum.
Even like that slowcore stuff that we had a couple albums of in a while can run into having ambient features. And we haven't even done things like Brian Eno's like found music, like from the airports and stuff, which is its own thing.
But so this was an interesting contrast to the other two albums we listened to this week. It was like, as a triptych, you kind of got all flavors this week in the albums.
Yeah, when you throw in the singles, it was I felt like we were working for like a mid-90s alt weekly. And they kind of said, all right, Josh and John, we have a lot of stuff we want you to like review this week across all genres, so have at it. And then we kind of like separated it, right? And then compared our notes, which that's kind of what I like about this show. You know what I mean? It's when it's at its best, it feels like that. Like that, we're getting challenged to not give easy opinions, and also we're banking like music IQ a little bit along the way.
Would I ever listen to Tortoise, and had we not done the podcast? No, probably not. I would never like come across
or Cool a Shaker, because I've been aware of them and I just never listen to them. But like, there's been so many albums that we've covered where I've said that, and then you listen and you're like, recently like Guided by Voices comes to mind. It's like, I don't think I ever would have listened to that. Then I listened to it, I'm like, oh, this is good shit. Or Belle and Sebastian, right? Was another one. Like I had people I knew listening to it, and I'm like, oh, yeah, there's only so much time in the day. You know what I mean? And then you listen to it, you're like, fuck, this is good. I'll revisit this. So, And I know Matt has also shared that that's been a discovery for him. So
definitely.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Good stuff. Well, we're full episode albuming it next week, and we read those albums at the end of last week, but I will. I
have them up.
You have them up. I'll do that, and then I'll read the singles. How about that?
Yep. We're going. We're back in '96, or still in '96, with Super Furry Animals, Fuzzy Logic. Matt will be back next week as well, folks. Beck is making an appearance with Odelay. We've got Buena Vista Social Club with their self-titled album. That's a movie I added to the Letterbox list as well. There's a documentary that Vim Vendors did about them, and then UGK with Riding Dirty, all from '96.
Not to be confused with Chamillionaires, right? Exactly. from 2006. Yeah. So, and the singles we're going to cover are Gangsta's Paradise by Coolio featuring LV, Hey Man Nice Shot by Filter, Name by the Goo Goo Dolls, Players Anthem by Junior Mafia, Down Low by R. Kelly, and I believe Ron Isley is on that one as well,
Nice.
and Sister by the Nixons. So that's an interesting radio station right there, Josh.
Yeah, really.
So,
Well, we feel the
So-
same way about the singles as we did this week. Find out.
it should be fun. I know all 6 of them, so
Mm.
it's going to be a little different than this week. So,
Great.
all right. Well, Matt will join us next week.
Yep.
Any
Good as
final
always.
thoughts?
Doing a duo bonus episode. Enjoyed that.
And we are past the 50 mark of regular episodes. So we were planning on doing 90 regular episodes for the 90s. Spoiler alert.
Wow.
So I don't know how long that will take us, but we're going to be headed to 51. So more than halfway through the 90s, Josh, before I don't know when we'll finish this journey or what that will look like. But
When we decide to
sometime
stop.
when we get to, can you imagine like one day, I wanted you to think of us in the future, like one day in the future when we're sitting there and we're like, we are officially caught up to the year 20, whatever it is. Right.
Yeah.
And we're like, and I don't know what that will be like. Do we have like beards and like realize like
Yes.
we've become self-actualized? So
Yeah,
I don't
we've written
know.
our manifesto.
I mean, we can write a damn book at this point. That's why we have spoiler alert for those that may be listening. We'll end with this. We do have an album database, and that album database, I'm sure there's something we'll do with it eventually because we'll have listened to so much freaking music. Like we'll have to do something with this.
We'll run it back and
wisdom.
start over because I'll have forgotten some of those albums.
You'll have forgotten. So, or you can just look at it and go, and just look at the 2,000 albums we covered, right? And say, which ones do I need to listen to again? Because I forget what they're like. So,
Yep.
So, all right. Well, that's a long way away, though, Josh. So,